Political scientists are in agreement what supporters of outgoing United States President Barack Hussein Obama will miss most when he leaves office is the dignity, class and intellectualism he and his family brought to the White House. The historic first black presidency of the country officially ends when New Yorker Donald Trump is sworn into office on Friday, bookending 8 years marked by the rescuing of a troubled economy, passing landmark yet controversial healthcare legislation and better relations with Cuba in what analysts call an imperfect foreign policy under his watch. Correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease looks back at the legacy of America's first black president.
Hello, Chicago.
It was an unseasonably warm November night in his adoptive hometown of Chicago when, at just 47 years old, Barack Obama would ascend to the highest office in the land, a message of hope and change that would alter the course of history.
I think on one level it's truly changed the United States, and on another level, what does that change mean? I think it's important and safe to say that on a very important level, which may be hard to judge for quite some time, there's been a decade of young Americans who have grown up with the natural notion of an African-American president.
Sherwin. Mr. President. How are you, sir?
We sat down to talk terrorism in Africa with President Obama at the White House in 2010, mere months before Democrats would lose control of the House of Representatives, an event that would significantly slow the agenda of this president, whether on immigration reform, Supreme Court nominees, or support for his calls to lift the embargo on Cuba.
This was certainly, maybe not the first president, but certainly the first modern president whose citizenship was challenged. There was a general disrespect. Now, this, I think, is safe to say, is not new in the sense that it really began around Clinton. And there's an aspect to this also of an attack on the 60s generation.
A large part of it is race. A large part of it is the fact that so many members of Congress and their constituencies could never wrap their minds around the fact that our 44th president is half Kenyan and is the leader of the free world.
Dr. Greer is also the author of Black Ethnics, Race, Immigration, and the Pursuit of the American Dream, issues that remain front and center in the American body politic.
Many of his policies aimed at a social welfare state that would lift all boats. And because there's systemic and institutional racism that has carried on in this country, and we have a disproportionate number of African Americans who tend to be on the lower end of the spectrum, as well as Latinos and people of color, I think a lot of Obama's policies are, because he knew he could never get a race-based policy through, it's a class-based policy to really think about the collective. And so that will ultimately help many African-American families.
Despite his great oratory skills, he has conceded to losing the PR battle on his policy choices, failing to close Guantanamo Bay, to holistically end the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, while Syria's implosion happened on his watch.
We had entered a new phase in a number of other ways. The one that's been commented on, of course, a lot is the media, which I'm sure you've been affected by, in the very sense that more than ever, certainly in the last decade, many Americans only receive their news through channels that already reflect what they believe. So there's much less of an awareness, let alone an acceptance of opposition ideas.
Because of that, there wasn't a sustained sort of, let me sit America down. Let me make sure that all of my surrogates from across the country, that's governors, that's senators, that's members of Congress, that's people in state houses, that's mayors, let's make sure all of them have the talking points and the clarification of what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, so that all voters understand the real importance of this moment in time. That never happened.
But where there is no argument is how the first family handled themselves over the last 8 years.
Dignity. This is the picture of a man who will be in your children's schools. You know, this is a man who literally, you know, the way the framers set it up, not as a king, but as the moral compass of this country. And we've seen Barack Obama, 0 scandals. No women, no money nonsense, nothing. This is just pure, he came and he did the work.
President Obama's supporters have been known to chant 4 more years. They want him to stay in office. Of course, that isn't possible. What is it about him that they will miss the most?
He was perhaps the most literate, intelligent, articulate, well-read, thoughtful, maybe to a fault, president that we've had in a long time. That's number one. Number two, of course, is an African-American family in the White House. And not only an African-American family, but the perfect family. And an administration with no scandal, you know, whatsoever. I mean, as much as people tried to find scandals, there really was no major scandal in this administration.
And back in Chicago, a final word to his supporters.
I'm asking you to believe, not in my ability to bring about change, but in yours.
A legacy threatened by his successor, but as yet undetermined, with time likely to have the final word, as it does with everything else. Sherwin Bryce-Pease, SABC News, Washington.